Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Ringside Nutrition Podcast. Today, I'm joined by performance nutritionist David Stache. David, thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to jump on the podcast. How are you coping in lockdown 3.0?
I'm enjoying it at the moment. It's not too bad. A little bit of isolation doesn't do me any harm. Gives me a bit of a chance to catch up on some other work, bit of reading, bit of learning, and yeah, just enjoying the slower pace. I'm sure it's all going to be a bit crazy once we're released out of all of this come March, April, May 2025, whatever year we're going to be out of it. But yeah, I'm sure I'll be bored in a few months, but I'm coping all right at the moment.
Yeah, so what I got you on because I wanted to talk to you about high performance sort of nutrition coaching and high performance in boxing and supporting elite fighters, because that's kind of like your primary sort of audience who you work with. For the guys listening who might not know much about you because you kind of hide in the shadows a little bit, what's kind of like your background into nutrition, and how did you get into working with boxers?
Oh, so I'll try and keep a short story version of this one, but I can sometimes waffle on. But I got really interested in physique type training and nutrition in my early 20s. Have a bit of like a sponge-like character. When I start to learn about something, I just want to learn everything and soak it all up. Started working with bodybuilders, then decided to switch from my degree in events management, finished that, and then started to study nutrition at degree level, and was working with bodybuilders and thought that they were a bit too high maintenance and they didn't get paid enough, so they didn't pay me too well. So it was more of a passion. But what that helped me do is start to realize like just how important nutrition is in those final weeks of preparing for a bodybuilding competition. I'd always been interested in combat sports. So I'd done a bit of Thai boxing. I was at the time doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, just because I like to roll around and get beaten up. And I was talking with a couple of guys who were competing about how they were making weight. And obviously I started to speak to them about like my background in nutrition and how I work with bodybuilders. And I started to see the red flags of what they were doing. And just from there, started to offer my services to them just as a general advice. And then from there, the different gyms that I train at, I started to speak to other fighters, and it just kind of snowballed from there. I had a supplement shop in Sheffield, which we opened in April 2013. And we had Kell Brook come down to do the opening. So being a Sheffield lad, we wanted him down. And then I started working with Kell, worked with him for a couple of fights, I think 3 fights. And then from there, it just kind of further snowballed. So I'd worked with a few hundred different fighters from around the UK. I was working through gyms in London, through to Scotland, but just it was very different back then. Things were done on forums, not Facebook and Instagram. So it was very much all word of mouth, which I preferred. Didn't really have to market myself. My work just kind of brought more work in. Stopped working with bodybuilders because they're just very hard work, and again, there's no real money in that. And whilst I'm not money driven, I kind of felt like I'd achieved what I needed to achieve. And it's all good and well getting someone to look good on stage for a 5-minute posing routine, but it's very different to get someone through a 12 times 3-minute round for a world title fight, and to really put it on the line and seeing what type of training they do. And it just kind of pulled me in. And since then, I've had a few times where I've thought, like, is it really for me? But having always been a boxing fan and combat sports fan, like ideal clients would have been like Naz back in the day. Again, being a Sheffield lad, it would have been brilliant to work with him. Would have been awesome to do some testing on Frank Bruno, looking at his physiology back in the day. So yeah, I've just always had an interest in it from when my dad sat me down watching boxing through to learning about nutrition and using bodybuilders and seeing the differences that can be made at like a real cellular level when you're really making changes to someone preparing for a show, and some of the nuances that you go through. So then how does that work with fighters who need to be both the lightest but strongest and fittest for come fight night? It just, like I say, it just kind of snowballed from there, really.
Yeah, it's always the way. It always seems to be a snowball effect of,
yeah,
and then it just goes from there. With the whole nutrition for performance, I think a misconception is that a lot of you see the photos like on Instagram, not forums and stuff these days, of the fighters weighing in, and they look shredded, or they look, in shape, quote unquote in shape. What's kind of like your philosophy? You touched on it there about performance. What's kind of like your philosophy, David, when it comes to nutrition for combat sports?
Well, I guess I'll kind of reflect on having listened to all of the episodes of your podcast. I'd say that the most common theme in all of them thus far has been making the weight. There's been a heavy discussion on weight making, and I think that's still a sign of how far behind boxing is in terms of performance. There's still so much of a focus on making the weight that people aren't really looking at, well, where is the performance benefits? We're not measuring the performance benefits. We're not saying, well, how as a nutritionist did you improve the performance? Did you improve the performance just because they lost weight and as a byproduct of that? Which to me is the wrong way of looking at it. The weight should be lost as a byproduct of improving performance. So my philosophy is that if we have a fighter who comes into camp and the sole focus has to be on making the weight, and that you're not really, that you're then very limited to performance improvements throughout camp, that's not the type of fighter I want to work with long term for a start, and that there's got to be some serious conversations about that. So yeah, I think these are performance athletes. I think we're the sporting or the sports science community needs to accept that we're all pretty good at getting these guys to make weight, or those of us that have got a good scientific background. We all know how to get these guys to make weight. We all know what variables we manipulate in the last week. But let's start showing how we can improve performance of these fighters. Let's really get them buying into nutritionists. Let's really get them buying into sports science. Because at the moment, I mean, I know myself, but generally a client will come to me and the first thing they want to talk about is their weight. And I'm like, if that's the only thing you're coming to me for, you need to go and find someone else, because that's just not going to interest me at all. And I think the sports science community's got a lot of work to do in terms of showing how we can improve performance. We can talk about supplements like creatine, beta-alanine, beetroot juice, all of these kind of things, but we really need to get these fighters to buy into how we can build the strategies to improve the performance, how we understand the demands of their sport, how we can work with their coaches to improve them as an athlete. So on the night, they've not just made weight and ballooned back up, but they've gone in that ring and they are the fittest, the strongest, the best recovery, and they're given all the tools they need to. It isn't just that, well, I made weight and I'm a better fighter. Because we do know that the supreme athletes, like the ones that really push everything into it, like your Lomachenkos and your Mayweathers, they're the ones that, that's what I want every fighter that I work with to aspire to be, to have the dream of being not just the one that makes weight, but the one that wins, because they've got the best athletic base, the fitter, the stronger, the more powerful. So that's kind of my philosophy on what I'm looking for with a fighter.
So that when a fighter comes and they want to work with you, or they want your support for the year or for a camp, what are you looking for? What qualities are you kind of looking for in them before you start working with them?
I want them to be aware of the fact that there's usually a lot of hard work to do, that I'm driven by data. They've got to buy into more than just making the weight. I want to feel like that they can trust me and I can trust them. I want them to know that I've got the best interests at heart, because ultimately I don't just do this because it's just my job. I do this because I'm incredibly passionate about working with winners. I enjoy being around people who are going to sit on the end of the ring after a sparring session with a towel over their head, and they've given it absolutely everything. And I guess, like, although it may just look like I write plans, I do a lot more than that, and I want them to know that I gave them absolutely everything, and that I sacrificed as well as they did, and that ultimately that's my expectations of them, that they're always honest, that there's a level of respect, and that we're there to win and we know what it takes to win.
It's almost like you're matching their passion and their desire with what you do. You're a professional and you're passionate and dedicated to what you do, just as much as they are. It's not you're sort of supporting them, but you're not passionate. You want to sort of work to the same standards that they're going to work towards.
Yeah, I think they do enjoy that as well. Like, I think the guys that I work with that I've done really well with would give me a glowing reference to that I go above and beyond what's kind of expected. If they sit there and they say that, if a client says, I just want a nutrition plan, there's 100 questions they're going to get back from me for that. Like, well, what's your training? What's your recovery? What's your resting heart rate? What's your heart rate recovery like between this session? What's your sweat rate like? What's your, we can go on and on. So, yeah,
they probably wish they hadn't have messaged you that.
again, I think, sometimes we can collect data for data's sake, and that's something I'm very conscious of. But ultimately, we have to show these fighters that if we're collecting this data, why we're collecting it and how we're using it and what the benefit of that is to them. And so that's what I expect when a client sits down in front of me, that they're not just going to say, well, just send me my macros over. I also want to know that they've got a coach that I can work with, a coach who's going to understand that I've got, of well over a decade of experience at working at the highest level now. That whilst, again, another thing for the community, scientific community, is we all go on about evidence-based practice, but if your only evidence is what's been published in a book or on a paper, you're going to get left behind. Fighters do want that cutting edge. They want boundaries to be pushed. They're constantly want to be pushing themselves. And I want to work with a coach who understands that as well. That can go, well, here's all the data that you've got, here's what's been published, yours hasn't been published, and this is why you're doing this. So yeah, I want an open-minded coach who understands the benefits of improving a fighter's overall athletic performance and recovery.
Yeah, something that I've become a bit big on recently as well is trying to work as part of that multidisciplinary team, and working with the coach, and they've got the same vision and they see the benefit. And I don't need to explain perhaps the benefits of certain methods being used. I'll just work on the nutrition, and then the end result will be from me or the S&C coach or whoever, that the fighter in sparring or in the ring will be fitter, faster, can go longer, fatigue less, and so your actions speak instead of you. But it's so important, like you said, to make sure that you're aligning not only with a fighter that matches your values and you want to work with, but the coach as well. That's such an interesting point.
Yeah.
Let's dive straight into talking about the MTK Performance Center, which you work at alongside Ben Davison, David. How's the process working there, and how's it been setting that up, and what was the idea behind that?
Well, it's a kind of a coming together, really. So 9 years ago now, I sat on a flight coming back from Fuerteventura after a training camp with a bunch of boxers, and started reflecting on all the things that went well, as probably we all do as practitioners. What's going well? What can I improve upon? And I started to map out this Ivan Drago type project where boxers bought into the whole scientific side of things, and we could run all the tests, and it would be a real focal point. And I kind of postulated that, maybe boxing would be an easier sport for athletes to move over to than other sports, and to be competitive. And I kind of parked that, but always kind of worked on it as new science came out. Kind of generalized the idea with, had a general discussion with Ben and given the gist of what it was when we were working with, when I was working with him for Tyson Fury's first Wilder fight. And he'd had this idea of setting up his own gym, and he'd been to the UFC Performance Institute out in the States, and we had a discussion last year, and he's like, I've got a unit, do you want to come down and have a look? We were in the midst of obviously on and off with lockdown, so as soon as lockdown finished, I went down, had a look, had a chat with him about what my vision would be and what I'd like to be able to deliver. We had a discussion, said like, it's not like it's not going to be a click your fingers and it's done type thing. It's a long-term project. We're effectively going to try and change the sport. But Ben's setting up a great space down there. And I'm there to support him along the way, whether that be picking up the nutrition for the fighters, whether that be advising on the overall sports science and the strength and conditioning or the recovery. But due to everything that's gone on, it obviously takes a little bit longer with getting planning permission and being able to just have a full run at getting the unit fitted out. But it will be an unbelievable space down there. He's got some top fighters already coming down there, some big names to come in as well once it's open. But currently, obviously, Josh Taylor, who will, he'll be the number one at 140, and then from what I'm hearing or reading last night, Teofimo Lopez wants a pop, and I think Josh will take him out at 135 or at 140. He could do 135, or Lopez can move up and try and take his belts at 140, and then I think Josh moves up to 147. And with the support of the Performance Centre, he's in the best hands. You've then got exciting guys like Shabazz Massoud, who is a bit of a stall on his career, but once he gets let off the leash, he'll be an absolute beast at super bantamweight, and I expect that he'll win world titles within a couple of years. And then obviously you've got Lee McGregor, who could probably fight at 5 different weights. a big bantamweight, and he's adamant that with a full camp he could probably do Superfly, but he would be a beast at lightweight, whether as well as he develops. He's still only young. Then you've got other guys like Leo and Lee Wood who fighting for a world title, who's an unbelievable athlete, and more names to come. So he's building a real stable of elite fighters and setting some new standards in boxing, which I think is where the sport's going to ultimately have to go. I think if you're not in part of a performance centre in 5 years, then you're just not going to get close to winning a world title.
Yeah, and it's like you said about the snowball effect at the start. I imagine that guys will be coming down and sparring at the relative different weights, and the guys that are training there every day will, they'll have sparring partners which will come in and they'll be sparring and seeing how good the performance center is and seeing the quality which is there and think that I want a piece of this, and try and look into at least sort of adopting some of the methods which they see or which they know are being implemented there. So with the methods or the stuff which is available at the performance center, and you spoke about recovery strategies and the importance of data and making nutrition individualized to each fighter, what sort of tests or methods are you implementing or running up at the center?
I mean, I can't give too much away at the moment, but obviously there's things that put out there. So using things like the PNOE for RMR testing, ramp testing, looking at substrate utilization. We've got a really great little gym with some amazing Kaiser equipment in there, which is really leading stuff to monitor athlete performance and recovery and fatigue. VBT, obviously we're using quite a bit of that down there. And then we'll look into your more kind of nuanced elements of having a team down there. And obviously, peak performance isn't just about like your cryotherapy, but having that on hand is always good to have. But being able to get a full 360 of your athlete and monitor absolutely every element. And I guess this is another thing that I think if practitioners are listening to this, I find it, what's the way of putting it? I'll not be diplomatic. I find it quite poor that more sports scientists aren't actually going along to boxing sessions. I know strength and conditioning coaches who I've worked with so many boxers, but don't even go and see the sparring sessions or the boxing sessions, aren't in touch with the coach. I think the biggest asset for the MTK Performance Center will be the fact that there's Ben, there's Lee Wiley, the strategist, there's me on hand, there's assistant coaches. It's having a team to look at all your athletes and be there and be the eyes, recording sessions, monitoring heart rate, not just having a heart rate monitor on and putting a post on Instagram about it, but having a heart rate monitor and knowing why they're actually using that. So we can track and monitor all the variables of the fight. So again, you can have all the cryotherapy and the physio on site and what have you, but the real benefit is having a really smart team around you that know how to make the best decision and aren't forcing you to make reactive decisions, but being more responsive. So they're probably the best elements. But some of the testing that we'll do, which you'll have seen, will be like the RMR, the ramp testing, body composition using a Fit 3D scanner, as well as the body metrics. And then having all the nice little toys like the watt bikes, the curves, the Kaiser equipment and VBT, so we can really push. So we really know when to push the athletes and train them smart, not just train hard.
Which is a common issue, which is seen in combat sports, overtraining, and not almost having the training sessions which have intent, as in just turning up to a gym or turning up. I always think like there's that magic number, David, of I'm going on a 10K run, or I'm going on a 5K run, and the boxers will stick a number on it. And it's almost like they don't really know why, but 10K has seemed to be a sticking number for fighters.
Yeah, I guess the 10K equates to a 60-minute steady run, doesn't it? And the 5K is a steady half an hour, 25-minute run that they go for. But and again, something that we saw, or that I've seen a lot with the testing that I've done over the years, whether it be with my own kit or with labs and other practitioners, is boxers are incredibly guilty of thinking that they're working hard, but really working just in that messy middle where they're not really, there's no adaptations occurring. They can just keep chugging away. And then that makes the coming into camp and the harder work that they've got to do that little bit more difficult. And again, having a team around you that understand that and can program when you're out of camp, is where I think we feel that the percentages will be made. So if a fighter's coming into camp and they're already prepped for that, they're already pretty much at VO2 peak when they come in, and we're not having to work on that side of things. If the recovery is generally good and the weight is within range, then we can just focus on pushing them at a hard, high, smart rate to do the work and learn the technical ability they need to win that fight.
How much are you kind of supporting fighters outside of fight camps then? Is it more intense, or is it like a kind of thing?
I think generally, like, this year has been quite difficult, but the vision is that, you know, we'll have metrics in place. You know, I mean, I guess Josh Taylor's a key example. He's been his last fight was at the end of September. It's been a check-in. His weight is where it should be. He's had weeks where he's not really eating too great, but he's done a bit of training. Josh likes to work hard. He really likes to be working in that upper 90% plus of his max. So sometimes we just have to put the brakes on him, and, you know, we need to talk to him about different thresholds and why they can become limiting factors. So he doesn't leave as much to do in terms of his athleticism, and his weight coming into camp is a lot more for technical stuff. So he's an example of where we don't need to do too much out of camp, because he's been an athlete for 15, 20 years. You know, he knows, he's gone through the GB setup, so he knows how important it is not to balloon up in weight. And we know where we're going to start his weight cut from. We know where he should be in camp. So it's out of camp, it's like dropping in with a message, it's having a video call once a week, it's having a nudge with his training, it's saying just put your heart rate monitor on for a couple of sessions so we can see where your heart rate is, checking his resting heart rate. It's things like that we will sometimes do. But whereas with other fighters who may come in and they're quite poor with what they do between camps, if they get really fat and really deconditioned, then yeah, we intend to make sure that doesn't happen by being more onto them. Whether that means calling them into camp sooner, whether that means calling them back into camp for weeks on, week off, so they go home for a week, in camp for a week. Then, you know, it's about making an individualized system, really. So we don't want to have, oh, these are the rules, but, you know, if you care about your fighters, then you're going to be checking on them anyway. If you don't, then you probably don't.
Yeah, the heart rate monitor is an interesting one, David, because like you said there about people having them on in pictures and on Instagram and posting that they've got a delivery of a new Polar heart rate monitor. Yeah. What would you say are kind of like the dangers of that, and how should fighters be using them properly? You talked about like that, the VO2 max and getting the heart rate up and being in that floating zone where they're not really in fat burning or fat oxidation, and they're not really at their peak fitness, and they're just sort of floating. How could a heart rate monitor be useful for a boxer when used properly?
So I will look initially at the beginning of camp, looking at heart rate recovery. Obviously, after running some tests, we'll look at how they're using certain fuels like carbs and fats during their sessions, and how that compares to previous data, but also compares to all of the data sets that I've got from before, from different fighters. And we'll start and use the heart rate monitor. I mean, a lot of people want to wear it for sparring. I'm not really a fan of that, because, you know, it's not a comfortable thing to wear as such, and you're not really going to use that data. We all know that certain things will happen in sparring that we'll never be able to replicate due to stress and stress hormones. So we'll use it for programming the conditioning work, making sure that heart rate recovery is something that we discuss each week, because the stress increases on the fire, how the load increases on them, and just general overall conditioning sessions as well for programming the conditioning. Where do we want them to be working? What adaptations are we expecting from those sessions? So not just going in and doing a generic, I don't know, hit type session, but going in and doing it with a bit more intent and a bit more personalization too.
Yeah, and then the testing obviously helps you set those relative zones specific to the individual, so they know exactly what kind of numbers which they need to be hitting with that as well.
Yeah, and what the testing also does is it gives the team a set of numbers, set of data to reflect upon. So we can discuss that going further into camp, and as we can start and observe that they may be getting a little bit more fatigued. And again, it's okay having the numbers, but sometimes the best metric is coming from the fighter themselves. If they tell you how they're feeling, if they've not slept well, if they're a little bit stressed because they've got, you know, kids woman issues, whatever, fight dates, getting moved around. Like sometimes that's the best data. So it's understanding that whilst the heart rate monitor is good and can provide some really solid data, it's just part of the puzzle really of the individual.
Sometimes a conversation can be a pretty valuable tool, right? Almost.
Exactly, yeah. What it does though for the team has been just to have good conversation starters. Like, we've noticed this about the heart rate data. We did this session before, and this is what we found, and this is what we're seeing now. Is it a good trigger for a conversation? Do we need to change and adjust the load? Do we need to monitor the recovery? Are they sleeping okay? Have we got them on too much of a restricted nutrition plan? You know, what strategies can we now utilize based on this data? It's just another one metric, but it can be a valuable metric. But I ask all of the fighters that I meet the same question, and I say, like, oh, do you wear a heart rate monitor? And they say, yeah. I'm like, who's analyzing that data, and what are they doing with that? And if they say, it's not if, it's usually they're saying nobody, nobody's analysing that data. And I'm like, well, are you looking at that data? What does that data mean to you? And if they're just saying, well, it's just showing me how much time I'm spending in the red, I'm like, well, it's a lot more useful than that. It's like, you know, a hammer can be used to knock in a nail or knock a house down, depending on how you're going to use it. So, the thing is you have to assess. The thing is, you have to assess how you're using it and is it really working for you. Just by doing those runs, by doing that technical session, we know where your heart rate is going to be, but how are we using that data? And if I can have a conversation with Ben to say, this is what I'm seeing from the data, or this is what me and one of the other guys are seeing from the data, go easy, or this guy can be pushed a bit more, you can get more out of those sessions. And if the fighters, you know, not feeling like they're being held back, then yeah, again, it's where we can keep improving. So it's another metric that we try and use smart rather than just it's there and it is what it is.
And do you use any other kind of tools? I mean, Chris Bidham-Smith in the last episode spoke about using a Whoop monitor to track sleep and stuff. Have you used, or do you use any other stuff apart from heart rate monitors to track things like sleep?
Yes.
It won't be revealed on this podcast episode, folks.
So I think I mean, I do. I use certain things to monitor the sleep quality and recovery, and some fighters buy into it, some don't. And again, it's what's making them comfortable, but diagnostics as well. So diagnosing sleep, and that can come from either some sort of testing which we can use, or it can come from just having a general conversation with the fighter. But sleep is a huge thing, and trying to teach the fighters how important the sleep is, and how Instagram and social media and Snapchat and FIFA all has an impact on that, and how it impacts their performance is something that, you know, you're always going to be fighting against in the world that we currently live in.
So these are kind of elite fighters like Josh Taylor, which you kind of look after, or you're part of the team. It'd be cool for the other fighters listening to this to get an insight into what it takes to kind of be an elite fighter at that level, and what kind of mindset that you need to have, such as like being away from family and having that team around you. What sort of stuff have you seen? Let's use Josh as an example. What have you seen, or the sacrifices that he's made, or what's the mindset that an elite fighter like that needs to have, and the qualities?
Consistency. I mean, I know it's such a cliche, but it's consistency. It's if you're blowing up between fights, like Josh comes into camp with 5 kilos to lose, and if you're coming into fights, and I think there's this whole notion at the moment, and again, I know I'm kind of swerving your question just a little bit, but I'll come back to it. But there's a whole notion of like, I'm big at the weight, but again, something that I will challenge a fighter. And I was like, are you big at the weight, or are you just shit at the weight? Because most fighters who claim to be big at the weight are just really shit. It's like, well, would you be so big at the weight if you weren't eating so much crap between fights? If you were cheating on your diet plan, if you were not being honest with your nutrition, would you be much better at the weight, or would you still be big at the weight? And 9 times out of 10, I've found that fighters are just generally quite shit at the weight, and they use being big at the weight as an excuse. Josh, as I say, comes in with 5.5 kilos to lose, but he's been consistent even when he's not in camp. He's training, he runs hard, he does heavy bag work at a high intense level. he's just got the mindset. But also, I think what I do notice about some of the top fighters is they've got a real fear of losing, and that fear of losing is what they harness to really push them on. They're not complacent. I think complacency in the fight game is something that will get you beat. You really have to believe you're the best to get to the levels of like Josh Taylor and obviously, and being around Tyson Fury, like that guy genuinely believes he's the best fighter of the generation. And having watched him spar and in training, I go, honestly, he's up there, you know. But he also has the fear of losing, and I think that's what got him through the Wilder camp. He really had to train hard for that. He had to diet hard still for that to get down to a weight where his coach wanted him at. So it's that mindset of utilizing the fear of losing to keep pushing you on, to be consistent, to turn up every day, to do every session, but also as well, like having the right team around you. That's what gets you to be a champion, especially in today's game. Boxing's moving forward. To be a champion, it's going to be no good that you just do a bit of pad work, a bit of footwork, and a bit of sparring. You're going to need to be a lot smarter than that. And again, to come back, the blueprint is already written. If you're not doing what Lomachenko was doing in his last few fights or his last decade of training, you're probably going to get left behind very, very quickly. 5 years' time, the sport's going to look very different, I think. So yeah, there isn't anything that I could say, oh, you must do this one thing, but they're just characteristics, as with any sport: discipline and consistency, fear of losing or not being the best and not realizing your potential.
I think if you stuck motivation on a board and you had it as one of the main ones, I think fear of failure or fear of losing would be most people's in pretty much any walk of life, business or family. Fear of failure is a massive motivator, so I can completely sort of understand that. And I always say to fighters, what's your why, and try and really dig deep into that. What is your why? And if they say, you know, I want to do it for my kids, or I want to do this, I want to do that, you have to really kind of pinpoint that and use that as your motivation.
The five whys is usually a good strategy to work on with boxers. You really get the honest answer after the 5 whys. If you push them through the 5 why process, you usually get the real gritty answer, or you'll get a quick jab telling you to shut up.
Yeah. So you worked, you said over a decade in nutritional combat sports. What are kind of like the biggest challenges which you faced working in the sport in that time? Obviously, you have to share more now.
Sorry, Jack. The first one was be getting paid. It's a difficult sport to get paid. You'll the amount of times I think I'm probably a bit fortunate now in that I don't have to do the free work to get my brand and name out there. It's probably a different world at the moment to what it was when I started. Not that I'm like that ancient, but you know. So I think getting paid is a difficult one. You can only take on so many freebies, and I still do work with clients for free. As in, I'll buy into the ones who tell me they're going to win a world title. I want to go along for that journey, and I always believe that at the right time I'll get paid when they can afford it. The biggest challenges are moving the focus away from just making the weight. If your focus is on just making the weight, then I'd probably have started a Weight Watchers alternative for fighters, Weight Watchers Club. So again, shifting the focus away from just making weight and instilling just how important nutrition can be. You know, that it's not the I've made the weight so easy type comments that give me the buzz. It's that session felt so much easier, or I've never felt as fit as this, or I feel so strong and powerful. And that's like 4 weeks out. And then you know you've got a fit, fueled fighter who's ready to make weight. And it's like when they're ignoring what the scales say because you've removed that stress from them. You've got 8 kilos to lose, 8 weeks to go. We're fine. We're going to cruise into weight. No problem. It's the challenges, I think. So, you know, when you meet a new fighter, they're all still hung up on making the weight. And that's why I think the sports science has got to kind of go, look, we know how much weight you can drop off you. We learn about your body through camp, so we can tailor that towards the end. We're all pretty much using the same strategies. No one's coming up with any voodoo magic, should I say. No, we're not Houdini, we're not magicians, we're just good scientists. And what separates us is how we implement the science and the strategies that we use, and how much attention we can pay to you. So shifting the focus away from, what I say, just making the way to actually being a performance athlete and getting in there and winning.
Yeah, performance is the biggest one, and trying to change that mindset and culture over time is a huge challenge. But I think I've sort of answered it there, is that it just takes being consistent. It takes time and developing and knowing that fighter and being around them and watching them spar and being part of the team, and just looking at it from a long-term viewpoint as opposed to a short-term one of, we're going to get to know you over a long period of time. You're going to have a long career. Let's kind of get rid of the whole let's make weight and let's start thinking about how you're going to perform to win a world title. So just to kind of wrap things up there, we've been talking for quite a while now. What's kind of like your plans for 2021? Obviously it's a bit of a strange year. No fights happening at the moment. It's January and British Boxing Board of Control said no fights are happening. What's your plans or prospective plans moving forward for 2021?
Well, I think we'll get back to some sort of normality with elite sports. So I'm hopeful that Josh will be out in a few months against Ramirez to unify all the titles at the light welterweight division. So I think that's a big plan, be part of that. Keep working with young, hungry, ambitious fighters who value what sports science is and performance nutrition can do for them. I have a little meal prep company called Nourish Smart, which is utilising a lot of the strategies that I've developed for working with fighters who need to drop weight but also perform, aimed more at your general public who want to lose some weight. So that's a delivered meal service. That'll probably launch, lockdown dependent, March, April time. It's been kept getting put back. Sitting alongside that is my own smart supplement range. So just some of the supplements that I believe in and I think the general public can benefit from, and a few other nice little additions too. Go on holiday at some point would be really nice this year.
Be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I've missed traveling. I did a couple of years of traveling around, kind of managing fight camps from a beach whilst on my laptop. That was quite nice. So it'd be nice to get on holiday. And just seeing the MTK Performance Centre grow and launch and develop into something what's going to be huge for not just itself, but for the sport of boxing too. And keep fit and healthy. That's probably the number one as well for me.
Yeah, it's probably top of the list. Keep positive, keep happy, and not take things too seriously, and just enjoy the process. Well, David, thanks so much for giving up your time to come on and chat to me today. This is a really insightful episode. I'm sure a lot of fighters take a lot of value from that, and you might get a few more maybe unwanted follows on social media if you're still on there. So apologies for that.
No worries.